Hi everyone, it's Michael Shire here. As you can see from my background, we've had quite a couple of weeks with the snow coming and falling in Massachusetts, and I'm sure perhaps some of you in different parts of the country have had your own weather issues. We, um, we found it to be quite contemplative. It's been fun to be at home for some of the time and to be out and about walking and uh, just wondering about the beautiful nature of uh, the world outside. The world inside is the world that we've been reading and thinking about, and thank you very much for starting off on our journey with the analysis of your life's journey and the opportunity to think about that in terms of chapter headings that you have considered for your pathway through life. And as we've indicated on our discussion board, those chapter headings are indicators sometimes of continuity. They move from one to another. There's some progression. And sometimes they're not. They're disjunctures. And one of the questions I asked near the end of the discussion was, what do those transitions represent for you? Are they transitions that move smoothly from one to another chapter in your life? Or have they been transitions of crisis or disruption? So those are the things to think about in the light of this exercise. And the reason why we are beginning to think about this in terms of our work on spiritual development for young children is to know that the life journey that we have that's ahead of us and for our children is ahead of them is one that will continually be one in which we will have to reflect on the experience of our lives and make meaning of it in its own context. We can look back, but we can't look forward. So our children who don't have a lot to look back on, but certainly that has been important to young children, even young children looking back on early childhood experiences have a lot to say. We'll deal with that later. These reflections on experience give us an opportunity to mark a moment, to create a milestone, and to begin to try and understand and clarify if there are patterns for us. Are there patterns of journeying? Are there patterns of finding a resting place? These are two very important concepts in the idea of being on a journey. Not only where are we going to, but where do we rest? Where do we settle into? And when we think of spiritual language, we think of spiritual seekers and spiritual dwellers. And sometimes we're in a dwelling place, and sometimes we're in a seeking place. So I very much appreciated you participating in this exercise and sharing it with each other. And we have raised some really important questions out of this exercise and of the readings that we've been doing together. The two readings that dealt with, and three readings that dealt with spiritual pathways, the David Ariel reading, Larry Hoffman, and Sherry Blumberg, gave us paradigms for thinking about spiritual pathways that have been developed in the Jewish community over the last 25 or so years. And those spiritual pathways are different, and they provide different ways of moving forward or deepening our experiences. And we'll have to think about where we place ourselves in those different ways. The third article by Kerry Litsky begins to introduce the idea of what does spirituality do for us. And his idea here of healing begins to bear on the fact that spirituality may not just be about what we feel, but it is about what we do and what we can do with this phenomenon. So I think healing becomes an important part of understanding that as an associate of spirituality, it is interconnected. And there may be other such interconnected associative spiritual enterprises that are connected to this main venture. In thinking about your reflections on spirituality, I want to raise some of the issues that you raised, some of the questions you raised, and begin to think about how our course will help us answer some of those questions. One of the questions I picked up on was the issue of what we might call the distinction between faithing and belief. What does that mean? Well, faithing is an activity. It's a core activity of making meaning And it's something that we can do every day in different ways. It involves relationships with others and with that which is beyond us. And it's not the same as believing. Believing is very much an intellectual phenomenon. It's about what our mind posits. And this tension between what we may call faithing and believing is at the heart of some of the concerns we may have about spirituality. There are those who only want to think about the issues of emotion, the issues of heart and soul, and there are those who also want to include issues of mind and rationality and reason into their spirituality. So where are we on this spectrum of faithing and believing, and what kind of a spirituality is made up by thinking of it in those terms? So that was definitely an issue, I think, that arose from our discussions. And we'll be talking about that later when we start to think about the ways in which James Fowler and others have defined the faith development school, and it's the word faith as a universal phenomenon accessible to all human beings, not just religious ones, but all human beings who seek meaning and purpose in their lives. Secondly, there is the issue of, well, who is there to guide us? And what is our responsibility as guides for others? Are we supposed to have all the answers? Are we supposed to say yes to everything? Or should we begin to be the people who posit the questions, who allow others to think for their own answers? Are we the ones who ask the questions? That's going to be something that comes up when we think about Rebecca Nye's work, working with the spirituality of childhood. And what can we do with children that will not repress or suppress their own natural instincts for all kinds of spiritual yearnings and aspirations, but rather will engender and nurture their own pathways. So that's something to think about as well. The third one was, I think, the issue of authenticity, and that really relates to the ways in which we can be authentic to our tradition as well as to ourselves. We're going to hear more about this from Bob Pasmino in a couple of weeks' time. He posits it as who we are and to whom we belong. And we will have to think about to whom we are being authentic. Is our tradition an authentic expression of the way in which we understand spirituality? So that authenticity, the issues of text, the issues of sacred story, of Bible, of liturgy, tefillah, how much of that do we need to incorporate into the spirituality we want to engender in others? And finally, the particular issue that was raised of the tension between being on one's own in this work and being in community. And where we stand, navigate that tension. How much of this work can I do and must I do and should I do and can I do on my own? Whether it's praying or wondering or contemplating, and how much should I do, can I do I do with my aligned community, whoever they may be. For some of us it may be a synagogue setting, for others it may be a school, for others it may be friends or family or peers, or indeed a book or a text or a God. So we're going to be thinking about person in relationship, and when we think about the definition of spirituality as what's being considered relational consciousness, and more of that later. So I just wanted to summarize a little bit of our discussions. There was a lot more that was in there. It was all very rich and a lot of personal descriptions, which I really appreciate that people were open enough to share with each other. We're going to have more time to discuss things together, both as a whole class and in Chavruta. So if you'll read the instructions for this week's work over the next 2 weeks, I'll be very much looking forward to interacting with you and having our time together on WebEx in the beginning of March. So all good wishes, and let's hope the weather continues to revolve and evolve around us. Bye-bye.